Chapter 1411. Dou Yuan had been selected by the shrewd Dai Tianling to become the heir to the throne, so he was naturally very intelligent himself, and he immediately realized what his father was implying. Are you saying it was the Tang Sect? Dai Tianling didn't respond, but there was a contemplative look in his eyes. Surely that's impossible. Dou Yuan's voice spiked up a few octaves as he exclaimed, the Tang Sect can alter the weather. That storm's focal destructive power can't compare with that of a Godslayer missile. But according to our statistics, if we were to take into account the area it had encompassed, the destructive power output would have been comparable to multiple Godslayer missiles exploding at once. If the Tang Sect had such technology, how did their headquarters get destroyed? Dai Tianling seemed to be rather displeased by his son's lack of composure, and he turned to him before replying. The circumstances surrounding the storm were very suspicious. If it really were a man-made storm, then there's only one possibility. Even if the Federation had this technology, it wouldn't use it on itself. The only other alternative would be multiple ultra-powerful sea soul beasts coming together to create such a storm. But sea soul beasts of that caliber have never appeared on our records. Hence, the only reasonable explanation is the Tang Sect. Dou Yuan drew a sharp breath upon hearing this. It's a good thing that the Tang Sect is on our side. Dai Tianling harumphed coldly. They're not on our side. They're siding with the underdogs to try and prevent this war. If we were more powerful than the Federation, they would definitely be standing against us. Dou Yuan's brows furrowed slightly upon hearing this. Father, why is it that a weapon-producing sect doesn't like war? Dai Tianling sighed. This is where the genius of the Tang Sect lies. They're not actually arms producers. They specialize in the research and development of soul technology. Only now do I truly believe that the level of technological advancement of the Tang Sect can compare with the entire Federation. The Federation's biggest mistake is trying to oppress the Tang Sect. Father, I have to go back to oversee the preparations now. I'll make sure that everything is set up as soon as possible. After waking up from a long slumber, Tang Wulin's entire body was still feeling very numb. This was obviously not a very comfortable feeling, but at the very least, his feebleness had abated significantly. He inspected his own internal condition to find that a purplish golden color had appeared over his meridians and bones, and compared to in the past, he seemed to have become thinner. On top of that, the total amount of soul power within his body had also decreased by at least a third. However, this didn't mean that his powers had decreased. Instead, there was now an indescribable sense of density to his soul power. Having had his body refined by that storm of lightning, he seemed to have progressed even further beyond his full mastery of the congenital secret method. A wry smile appeared on Tang Wulin's face. He was becoming less and less like a human being. The soul power within his body had clearly been compressed. Soul power cultivated by the mysterious heaven method was already highly compressed. To further compress it down to two-thirds of its original mass was certainly no simple feat. Through the storm of lightning, the infernal lightning vine had undoubtedly benefited immensely, and Tang Wulin had also reaped many fruits. The total amount of soul power within his body had decreased, but he had become a true title Douluo, and he could clearly sense that his physical constitution had improved even further. He didn't know what soul skills the infernal lightning vine had bestowed upon him, but a 100,000-year-old soul ring would grant him at least two of the three insanely powerful abilities that the infernal lightning vine had displayed in the past. This would definitely provide a massive enhancement in his overall power. Thinking back, he had progressed all the way from a soul sage to a title Douluo during this journey, which had spanned less than a year. This was simply an unimaginable leap. On top of that, he now had the full support of Shrek Academy and the Tang Sect, as well as from the power of his father. Even though it was only for a very short time, Tang Wulin had ingrained the image of his father unleashing unpredictable storm firmly into his mind. He had never met his father before, but from everything that his father had left to him, he could sense just how much love his father had for him. Father, mother, I'll definitely find you someday. It was time to give himself a Douluo title. Before he had obtained his ninth soul ring, he hadn't been a true title Douluo, but now, he had the right to attain a title. Generally speaking, Douluo titles were all related to one's martial soul. For example, Elder Long's martial soul was the Light and Darkness Holy Dragon, so she was known as the Light Dark Douluo. In other cases, there were also Douluo titles that combined one's martial soul and the name of their lover, such as Teacher Wu's Sky Ice Douluo title, which combined the Skyfrost sword and the name of Longbing. His martial soul was the Blue Silver Emperor, but a lot of his power was derived from his Golden Dragon King bloodline. Furthermore, he had the power of the sea god left to him by his father, and there was also an extremely important woman in his life. Dragon Emperor Douluo. That title would cut her out. A Douluo title could only contain two words, and that didn't seem to be enough for him. His suit of three-word battle armor had been named Dragon Moon Song, and he already decided that when he attained a suit of four-word battle armor in the future, he would name it Golden Dragon Moon Song. Seeing as his battle armor was already going to contain the words Golden Dragon, he would remove it from his Douluo title. The Blue Silver Emperor had been inherited from his father, and Dou Yuna's martial soul was the Silver Dragon Emperor, so silver was something that he had to retain. Dou Yuna's name had three characters. If he were to use the moon part of her name, that wouldn't be very appropriate as such a Douluo title already existed in the form of the Silver Moon Douluo. It was Elokai. He began to stroke the Silver Dragon King scale hanging in front of his chest in an absent-minded manner. This name was not easy to come up with. He couldn't go with Silver Ancient Douluo. That simply didn't sound good. As the Tang Sect master, he had to have a more grand and spectacular Douluo title. Dou Yue, can you give me a sign? All of a sudden, the scale he was stroking trembled slightly, and a burst of faint spiritual fluctuations entered his mind, as if to resonate with his thoughts. My Douluo title is Silver Qilin, and my four-word battle armor will be named Silver Dragon Dancing Qilin. It was Dou Yue. She really was able to contact him through the scale. Tang Wulin hurriedly injected his spiritual power into the scale to try and contact Dou Yuna, only to completely fail to detect any spiritual fluctuations. This was so unfair. She could sense his thoughts, but he couldn't sense her at all. A wry smile appeared on Tang Wulin's face, but at the same time, the message transmitted to him by Dou Yuna had struck him with a sense of inspiration. Silver Dragon Dancing Qilin? That matched very well with his Golden Dragon Moon Song. Her Douluo title was Silver Qilin, which was Silver Dragon King combined with his name. So how about? Tang Wulin had made a decision. The giant metal pillars were slowly withdrawn, and after 5 days of rest and recuperation, the Federal fleet had fully recovered. All of the soldiers had outstanding recovery ability, and aside from some damaged items that couldn't be repaired, the Federal fleet had maintained at least 90% of its peak condition. Advance. That was the order issued by Chen Zhenji. He was naturally aware that the Douluo Empire had to have discovered the Federal fleet already, but so what? That didn't mean that the Empire would be able to stop them. The three fleets formed an enormous triangle with the three aircraft carriers at its core, and they sped toward the Douluo Empire shoreline with all of their soul tools ready for battle. Commander, there are at least 4 corps of troops stationed on the Douluo Empire coastline, as well as all types of large defensive soul tools. Commander, according to our sensory devices, the defensive capability of the Douluo Empire shoreline exceeds our projections by 30%. Commander, there are no Douluo Empire ships within a radius of 500 nautical miles. Commander, according to our thermal imaging devices, there are over 3,000 Douluo Empire mechas situated on the shoreline. The grades of the mechas are still unknown. A series of reports were being made to the control center, and Chen Zhenji merely listened without giving instructions, which meant that everything was to proceed as planned. Things were going to be more troublesome now that the enemy was prepared. As for how much more troublesome, that would depend on how much power the Douluo Empire had been able to muster up. Chapter 1412. Dai Tianling was renowned as the most outstanding emperor that the Douluo Empire had seen in 1,000 years. Chen Zhenji wanted to see just how powerful the Douluo Empire had become under his rule. Currently, he was actually more concerned about the storm that had taken place earlier than the Douluo Empire. He had clearly seen that figure following the conclusion of the storm, which meant that he had to have had something to do with the storm. How had he managed to stir up such a devastating weather phenomenon? There was a massive gap between their cultivation ranks, so how had Tang Wulin managed to deprive him of his control over the sea? As the boundless ocean Douluo, Chen Zhenji was at the height of his powers in the ocean. He had always thought that he would be invincible in the sea, but he had been dealt a heavy blow, and by such a young man, no less. Exactly what kind of secrets were being harbored by him and the Tang Sect? Even if he wanted to cover for the Tang Sect and Shrek Academy, there would be no way for him to cover up Tang Wulin's involvement in this incident. The entire Federal fleet had seen him, and video footage of him had already been transmitted back to the Federation. This was definitely going to have a very negative impact on the Tang Sect. Compared to the Tang Sect master's participation in the trial of 5 gods, this was a far more damning incident that would pile even more pressure on the Tang Sect. Commander, we are about to enter the range of the enemy's large offensive soul tools. Chen Zhenji immediately abandoned that train of thought and ordered, proceed according to the original plan. All ships. Prepare to attack. All fighter aircrafts. Take off. The plan for this battle had already been refined countless times, and it was as simple as it was elegant. The entire plan could be condensed into a single word: blitzkrieg. They were going to crush the enemy's defenses through brute force, then establish a firm foothold on land and construct the necessary infrastructure. After that, they were going to scout out the locations of the opposing troops, then attack them with the firepower of the three fleets, crushing the Empire's military forces before conquering the entire land. If everything went according to plan, the Douluo Empire would be entirely conquered in no more than 3 months. In the eyes of Chen Xinji, this wasn't a difficult task. After all, the Douluo Empire's technology and military prowess couldn't even begin to compare with that of the Federation. Beep beep beep. All of a sudden, a sharp siren sounded, and the aircraft carrier's protective barrier was automatically activated in the face of an attack. A streak of red light suddenly rose up from the shoreline in the distance without any warning, then hurtled directly toward the Sea God Fleet's aircraft carrier while drawing a dazzling parabola through the air. The Douluo Empire had unleashed the first attack. Chen Xinji's expression darkened upon seeing this. According to their original plan, he was going to give the Empire a chance to surrender, but there was no need for that now. The aircraft carrier's protective barriers were fully activated, and at the same time, streaks of powerful light were launched to intercept the oncoming attack. Aircraft carriers were among the most powerful modern weapons and were essentially fortresses on water. There wasn't even a single aircraft carrier to share between the Douluo Empire and Douluo Empire, and if the 3 aircraft carriers hadn't acted as the main stabilizing forces of the Federal Fleet, it would have already been wiped out by that storm a few days ago. As such, carrier-based vanguard groups were essentially invincible out at sea. The aircraft carrier's protective barriers could easily withstand the explosion of a ninth-grade Sol missile, and its interception system was also the most advanced. There were almost no attacks that could breach these stalwart defenses. Boom. The streak of red light exploded violently after being intercepted, and the entire sky was instantly stained red as fireballs fell from the sky like rain. The provocation from the Douluo Empire had enraged the Federal Fleet, yet just as they were about to retaliate, another streak of red light suddenly descended from the explosion that had just taken place up above. The interception system was kept at bay by the force of the explosion, so this second streak of red light was able to fall directly upon the aircraft carrier's protective barrier. Rumble. An extremely terrifying explosion erupted on the protective barrier, and the entire aircraft carrier trembled violently as it was forced to tilt off to the side, while the entire world outside the windows had turned bright red. Piercing sirens rang out within the entire control center, and the energy storm created by the violent shockwaves had caused all of the sensory devices in the aircraft carrier to temporarily malfunction. Even a ninth-grade Sol missile couldn't unleash this much destructive power, setting aside how that streak of red light had managed to pierce through the interception system. Just its explosive power was something that a ninth-grade Sol missile definitely couldn't match. A chill immediately ran down Chen Xinji's spine as a possibility occurred to him, and a sense of fury also welled up in his heart. The explosion of red light lingered for close to 10 seconds before finally subsiding, and the formation of the Federal Fleet had been thrown into disarray. From a bird's eye perspective, one would be able to see that even though the protective barrier had just barely managed to withstand the force of the explosion, the front end of the Sea God Fleet's aircraft carrier had sunk slightly, and it had been forced backward, crashing into several ships in the process. The warship that was closest to it had been sent drifting off to the side, and this was downright unimaginable. In the eyes of the Federal Fleet, the Douluo Empire was like a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. However, they suddenly discovered that it was a wolf in sheep's skin, and now that it was bearing its fangs, everyone was taken by surprise. The Sea God Fleet's aircraft carrier was the most powerful one among the 3 fleets, yet it had still been forced back. The commanders of the other 2 aircraft carriers couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if the target had been one of their aircraft carriers. Would their protective barriers have been able to withstand such an attack? The condition of the Sea God Fleet's aircraft carrier was currently unclear, but it definitely hadn't managed to remain completely unscathed. Since when did the Douluo Empire come into possession of such a powerful weapon? Even the aircraft carrier's defense system hadn't managed to destroy it, and it had even been capable of exploding a second time. What exactly was that thing? There was definitely no such weapon in the Federation. At the same time, the Douluo Empire control center had erupted into cheers. When the second explosion of red light appeared on the screen, everyone, including Dai Tianling and Dai Yuan, had let loose raucous cheers. The enormous aircraft carriers were like mountains weighing down on their hearts, yet the Sea God Fleet's aircraft carrier had been knocked lopsided by 30 degrees. Even with its powerful defenses, it hadn't been able to withstand that attack. Perhaps they would be able to sink it with another one of the same missile. Chapter 1413. Dai Tianling could still clearly recall the description for the Sol missile that had just been launched. Its name was the twofold Sol harvesting missile, and of course, it wasn't a ninth-grade Sol missile. According to the Tang Sect's evaluation system, it was a 10th-grade Sol missile, and it was comprised of 2 Sol missiles connected together using a special method. The primary missile's explosion would produce a burst of powerful explosive force, unleashing destructive power while protecting the secondary missile within. The secondary missile's core circuits allowed it to devour the violent energy in the outside world, thereby making its own internal structure extremely unstable. As a result, an extremely powerful second explosion would ensue, and it would be imbued with exceptional explosive and penetrative power. If the twofold Sol harvesting missile had been allowed to strike without any interception, even an aircraft carrier wouldn't have been able to withstand the power of its 2 consecutive explosions. The first explosion would allow the secondary missile to burrow straight into the ship, then produce an even greater explosion. The core circuits for this type of Sol missile had to be accurate to a T. Otherwise, if both missiles were to detonate at the same time, the effect would be significantly lessened. It was essentially a combination of 2 ninth-grade Sol missiles, but the power unleashed was superior to the sum of its 2 constituent parts, which meant that it had gone beyond the realm of a ninth-grade Sol missile. Having said that, it wasn't entirely accurate to call it a 10th-grade Sol missile as there were no set criteria for 10th and 11th-grade Sol missiles in the Federation. It was undoubtedly the case that this twofold Sol harvesting missile had come from the Tang Sect, and it was so expensive that even Dai Tianling had winced at the sight of its price. However, in the instant that the missile forced back the aircraft carrier, he knew that this was money well spent. If it weren't for the agreement that the Empire had forged with the Tang Sect, he really wanted to immediately launch another one to completely destroy that aircraft carrier. Unfortunately, he couldn't do that. Destroying an aircraft carrier wouldn't be enough to turn the tide of the war, and it would make the Empire and the Federation sworn enemies, something that the Empire couldn't afford to have happen. On top of that, they only had a total of 4 twofold Sol harvesting missiles, and regardless of how powerful a weapon was, it always had the greatest intimidation factor before it was used. Only after close to 20 minutes did the Sea God Fleet's aircraft carrier completely stabilize itself. But the sirens continued to blare. The Sol power detection system and thermal imaging system have been damaged. The protective barrier's efficacy has fallen to 30% and is currently slowly recovering. Due to the excessive energy expenditure, the radar detection system has been severely impacted, and 7 fighter aircrafts have been damaged. A series of reports were being made alongside the loud sirens. As for the warship that the aircraft carrier had crashed into, it was in an even worse condition. Its left side had been severely damaged, and if emergency repairs weren't applied, it would run the risk of sinking. It hadn't activated its protective barrier at the time, and was rammed into directly by the aircraft carrier. If this had been a warship from either one of the other 2 fleets, it would have most likely sunk on the spot. Not only had Chen Xinji's expression become very strained, all of the commanders' expressions had also darkened significantly. That attack had come close to sinking the aircraft carrier. Did the enemy have more of these weapons? A stunned silence had settled over the Federal Fleet, and the Douluo Empire was also waiting for the situation to unfold further. Through the surveillance devices, it could be seen that a series of cannons had been set up on the shoreline, and Sol missiles had already been loaded into them, so they were ready to fire at a moment's notice. The same also applied to the Federal Fleet. The Sol missiles that the Douluo Empire was preparing to fire were all extremely huge and of a dark red color, making them particularly eye-catching. Thinking back to the explosions of red light earlier, the Federal Fleet was naturally very wary of this. The biggest problem was that the Federal Fleet had no idea how many Sol missiles of that caliber the Douluo Empire possessed. If 2 of them were launched in succession, even an aircraft carrier would be destroyed, and that was far too heavy a price for the Federation to pay. The main advantage the Federation had was its 3 aircraft carriers. If they were to be destroyed, then the invasion would become extremely difficult to achieve. Of course, if the 3 aircraft carriers were to open fire with all their might, they'd also be able to destroy everything on the shoreline, but at such close range, neither side could ensure that they wouldn't be struck by enemy retaliation. The Sol missile from before had arrived far too abruptly, and it had been launched from outside of the Federal Fleet's projected attack range, so they hadn't been able to retaliate right away. But the situation was different now. If either side were to attack under these circumstances, then it was very likely that a mutually destructive battle would commence. What should they do? Judging from the range of that last attack, the Federal Fleet no longer had any advantage in that area. If a battle were to break out, even if they were to win, the 3 fleets would most likely sustain severe damage. At this point, it had already become very clear to Chen Xinji that there was only one possible power that would have been able to supply the Douluo Empire with such a weapon. Aside from from the Tang Sect, who else would be capable of developing such a weapon? A soul missile of this caliber was truly able to pose a threat even to a warship. Tang Wulin had visited the Douluo Empire and Dou Spirit Empire most likely for the purpose of delivering weapons to them. In doing so, the Tang Sect was committing an act of treason. In any case, the threat was looming right before them, and how they addressed it was going to impact the rest of the war. Even though Chen Xinji's heart was burning with fury, he forced himself to remain calm as the commander of the Federal Fleet. Retreat 100 nautical miles. He could no longer make a decision on his own in this current situation. He had to contact the Federation and ask for a verdict. If the two sides were to clash, the ensuing battle would most likely inflict severe damage onto both sides, and that wasn't beneficial to the Federation in the slightest. They retreated. Ha ha ha, the Federal Fleet is scared. In contrast with the tense and gloomy atmosphere in the Federal Fleet, the Douluo Empire Control Center was in full celebration. They had forced back the entire Federal Fleet with just a single soul missile and completed their first objective. However, Dai Tianling wasn't cheering. In fact, his heart was currently filled with remorse. The twofold soul harvesting missile had shown him just how incredible the Tang Sect's technology was. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that if the Tang Sect were to provide all of its soul technology to the Douluo Empire, the Empire would be able to catch up to the Federation in just a few years. The two continents were extremely far apart, so wars could only be waged through fleets. As long as there wasn't a massive technological disparity, the Douluo Empire had nothing to fear. Furthermore, the Empire had far more resources than the Federation. If it could receive the Tang Sect's unreserved technological support, then they'd be able to take many shortcuts and outstrip the Federation when it came to space exploration. Chapter 1414. Dai Tianling was feeling very remorseful. He should have displayed an even better attitude toward the Tang Sect and not been so conceited. Only after witnessing the Tang Sect's soul weapons did he truly realize just how far the Douluo Empire was lagging behind. He had to tie the Tang Sect and the Douluo Empire together in the future regardless of the cost. This was the greatest opportunity for the Empire to ascend to greater heights. With that in mind, Tang Wulin's handsome face surfaced in Dai Tianling's mind again. He really wanted to kill this brat who had fled after thoroughly embarrassing his daughter, but at the same time, if it weren't for Tang Wulin, the people on the Federal Fleet would be the ones celebrating right now. On top of that, he was even more interested in the violent storm that had been conjured up several days ago. If the Douluo Empire could learn the ability to alter the weather from the Tang Sect, then it would no longer have to fear the Federation. Tang Wulin was naturally unaware of what Dai Tianling was thinking. At this moment, the Tang Sect submarine was traveling toward the Douluo continent at its maximum speed. After resting for a few days, Tang Wulin had already recovered to peak condition. They were situated deep in the sea, so they had no idea what was happening in the Douluo Empire, but they had done everything they could. If the Douluo Empire still couldn't keep the Federal Fleet at bay, then there was nothing further they could do. You really do seem to be fine now. Even I can no longer assess the condition of your body. All I can say is that your physical constitution has already exceeded what should be humanly possible. Even a limit Douluo like myself can't compare with your physical constitution. After returning from the Imperial Palace, the Holy Spirit Douluo, who'd been constantly monitoring Tang Wulin's bodily condition during the past few days, she had been informed of what had happened during that storm, and she had been astonished that Tang Wulin had managed to remain completely unharmed during that fearsome storm of lightning. At the same time, she was also very concerned for him and examined his body every day to ensure that he was fully healthy. As it turned out, Tang Wulin truly possessed an inhuman body. Not only was it completely unharmed, it had never been better. His physical constitution could only be described as exceptional, and it was improving every single day. After becoming a true title Douluo, it was more important for Tang Wulin to consolidate his powers rather than seek to make further improvements, and he had done very well in this aspect. The goal he had set for himself was very simple. He wanted to completely consolidate his own powers and fully master his own body prior to returning to the Douluo continent. Thank you, Mother. I also feel like I've never been better. The drastic enhancements Tang Wulin's body had undergone had left him in very high spirits, and he could even sense that the threat posed to him by the Golden Dragon King seals had diminished significantly. At this point, there were still 6 Golden Dragon King seals left, each of which was definitely going to be even more fearsome than the previous one. However, he was confident that he would at least be able to break the 13th seal without too much trouble. Through his communication with his birth father, he knew that he had to delay the opening of the seals as much as possible. Otherwise, even the power that his father had left within his body wouldn't be able to repress the Golden Dragon King's destructive intent. After all, that was the will of a top-tier god. Unless he were to become a god himself, there was no way that he would be able to completely absorb the Golden Dragon King's power. As such, even though he had undergone drastic improvements, Tang Wulin had no intention of opening any of the Golden Dragon King seals in the near future. At present, it was far more important for him to collate all of his current abilities. He had benefited immensely from this trip, and the return trip of over 2 months was the perfect opportunity for him to digest all of the rewards he had reaped. In the eyes of his friends, Tang Wulin seemed to be changing every single day. The domineering disposition he once had was now far more gentle, and he often appeared to be an ordinary person. But the more that this became the case, the more dangerous he appeared in everyone's eyes. Let's not, boss, she said as he looked at Tang Wulin with a reluctant expression. Tang Wulin was left feeling rather speechless. Haven't you always wanted to surpass me? So let's have a sparring match. Don't worry, I'll go easy on you. She immediately shook his head vigorously in response. No, I have no intention of surpassing you. I've never had such intentions. Yue Tang Yu is the one who's always wanted to surpass you. You can ask him if you don't believe me. After witnessing that storm in person, she had no interest in sparring with the monster that was Tang Wulin. Xu Shaoan was standing off to the side, giggling with her hand over her mouth rather than begging for mercy in Yue Tang Yu's stead. Yi Xinglin and Yuan and Yui were currently completing everyone's suits of 3-word battle armor, and at this current rate, all of Shrek's 7 monsters would become 3-word battle armor masters by the time they arrived back at the Douluo continent. Through his recent self-evaluation and consolidation, Tang Wulin had learned many things, but skills could only be put into practice through battle. So he sought out Xi as a sparring partner. Go kill yourself, Xi. When did I ever say I wanted to surpass, Captain? How could you stab me in the back like that? Captain, I've always been your most loyal supporter. Xi is constantly talking trash behind your back, so you should teach him a good lesson. We'll all be cheering for you. As soon as the voice trailed off, Yue Tang Yu emerged into the cabin, then took a pained glance at Xu Shaoan, who had notified him of what was happening. Tang Wulin sighed in a resigned manner. How about a 2-on-1 match? No way. Both of them replied in unison. Tang Wulin was now a title Douluo, while Yue Tang Yu had only just become a soul Douluo 2 days ago, and Xi hadn't even reached the soul Douluo level yet. Even when they had been at the same cultivation rank, they had still been no match for Tang Wulin in a 2-on-1 battle. There was no way they would accept a sparring match with Tang Wulin at a far superior cultivation rank. You're a pair of cowards. Tang Wulin felt quite speechless. He was truly itching for an opponent and was even beginning to miss the trial of 5 gods. The greater the pressure exerted on him, the more his latent potential could be stimulated, but there seemed to be no suitable opponent for him on this submarine. Yali was a limit Douluo, but her forte lay in healing rather than battle. As for everyone else, no one wanted to spar with him. How about we throw in Shaoan and Lizzie as well? We'll have a 4-on-1 match. Tang Wulin proposed with an expectant expression. Xu Shaoan pouted in a pitiable manner. Captain, I'm a girl. How could you? Tang Wulin snapped. Don't try to fool me. Even back when we first met, you've always had superb acting skills. You're not going to trick me. I miss Xinglin and Yuanan. If they were here, they definitely wouldn't turn down my challenge. If you don't even dare to face challenges, how? Will you continue to advance? Take me, for example. I always make the fastest progress when I'm constantly facing powerful opponents. No way. The 3 of them exclaimed in unison. Fine, I'll go to the surface and train by myself then. Perhaps I'll encounter some powerful sea soul beast. Tang Wulin grumbled in a disgruntled manner. In reality, he knew that there was no way he would encounter any antagonistic sea soul beasts. With his sea god aura, no sea soul beast would attack him. The submarine drifted upward, and Tang Wulin flew out onto the surface of the sea. He inhaled a lungful of the fresh and moist air, and he instantly felt reinvigorated. Xi and the others weren't willing to spar with him, but they certainly weren't going to miss out on an opportunity to leave the submarine for some fresh air, so they had accompanied him. However, they didn't dare to approach him and only looked on from afar with wariness in their eyes. Arahang and Sima Jinkai were always up for a battle, but both of them were currently in seclusion, leaving Tang Wulin with no one to test his powers against, and this was not a good feeling. A hint of purple flashed through his eyes, and a series of soul rings emerged from beneath his feet, comprised of 4 blacks, 1 greenish golden, 3 orange goldens, and a crimson ninth soul ring that was giving off a faint layer of purplish golden light. It was very likely that Tang Wulin was the first person in history to to possess a 100,000-year-old infernal lightning vine soul ring and soul spirit. The 9 soul rings resonated with one another, and even though their colors weren't uniform, the mystery of the greenish golden soul ring, the spectacle of the orange golden soul rings, and the regal majesty of the purplish golden soul ring presented a marvelous combination to behold. His long hair trailed down his back, and he began to give off a peculiar disposition. In the instant that he had appeared, even the sea water seemed to have become clearer. Rich water elements revolved around his body, carrying him up into the air, and even in flight, there was no expenditure, thereby allowing him to constantly maintain his peak condition. Chapter 1415. Tang Wulin couldn't truly draw upon the power of the sea, but as the son of the sea god, he would naturally receive the blessings of the ocean, and the sea was his most loyal guardian. It could be said that it would be virtually impossible even for a demigod-level limit Douluo to kill him out at sea. Tang Wulin's heart was filled with emotion as he sensed the changes in the energy fluctuations within his body. Only after becoming a titled Douluo did he truly feel like he was worthy of the titles of Tang Sect Master and Sea God's Pavilion Master. Looking back, everything had happened so quickly that even he was still in disbelief. So many years of effort and sacrifice had finally allowed him to attain his current level of power. He was confident that he would become a limit Douluo in the near future, and he had to take that step en route to becoming a god, as only then would he be able to find his family. Many soul masters drew motivation in their cultivation from visions of grandeur and power, but those things weren't very attractive to Tang Wulin. What truly motivated him was the relationship that he shared with those closest to him. In order to attain the power to protect Yuna, he was willing to sacrifice to constantly advance onward, striving toward the day when he would be able to stand by her side to face her troubles together. In order to find his birth parents, he had to go even higher and rise beyond the limits of humans to become a god. This goal was an extremely distant one, but so what? His father had managed to achieve it, so why couldn't he? With that in mind, Tang Wulin was instilled with a sense of vigor, and he couldn't help but throw his head back and let loose a long cry straight into the heavens. His voice spread far into the distance over the boundless ocean, and the placid seawater began to churn slightly as rich water elements revolved around him in an affectionate manner. A series of blue-silver emperor vines emerged from Tang Wulin's body, and each vine was around as thick as a human arm. They seemed to be slightly thinner than they had been in the past, but all of them were covered in fine dragon scales. The vines were bluish-golden in color, but they were enshrouded within a layer of purplish golden light. No visible arcs of lightning had appeared, but in the instant that these blue-silver emperor vines emerged, the air around Tang Wulin began to warp noticeably, as if it were about to be torn apart. Purplish golden light flashed through Tang Wulin's eyes, and he pointed a finger forward, upon which countless blue-silver emperor vines shot forth toward the same direction like lightning, converging to form a giant spear that was his blue emperor fury of the masses. Spear intent surged through the heavens, and a rumbling boom akin to a dull thunderclap suddenly rang out as what appeared to be a purplish golden void appeared around a kilometer away. The void was only there for an instant before vanishing, but in that instant, the air up ahead had clearly exploded. There was no spillage of energy, and the strike didn't appear to have been all that powerful, but it was a result of Tang Wulin doing his best to condense all of the energy together. He swept a hand through the air, and the blue-silver emperor vines suddenly formed a long spear, then a giant hammer, then a massive vortex, then a long staff. The blue-silver emperor vines underwent a series of rapid transformations before transforming into countless bluish golden giant dragons that revolved around him while expelling purplish golden light out of their mouths. All of a sudden, Tang Wulin's ninth soul ring lit up, and the purplish golden light was radiating abruptly faded. The blue-silver emperor vines around him instantly disappeared, and the space around him with a diameter of around a kilometer fell completely dim. Countless bolts of purplish golden lightning erupted from his body, forming a sea of lightning that threatened to destroy the entire space around him. This was the first soul skill that the infernal lightning vine had bestowed upon him. Blue Emperor Myriad Lightning Hell. Tang Wulin had initially thought that the infernal lightning vine would bestow upon him 2 of its 3 original soul skills, but after the infernal lightning vine had fused with his blue silver emperor, it had undergone a mutation, and this Blue Emperor Myriad Lightning Hell was a result of that. The combination of Lightning Forest and Lightning Hell, in conjunction with the resolute nature of the Blue Silver Emperor, had formed this current ability. Within the Blue Emperor Myriad Lightning Hell, every single Blue Silver Emperor vine would become a part of the lightning to create an even more devastating attack. This was an offensive soul skill with a very large scope, and its destructive power was of the same nature as that of the Infernal Lightning Vine, but it was far more fearsome than the original soul skills of the Infernal Lightning Vine. Shishi's face paled as he looked on in the distance, and he was giving himself a mental pat on the back for refusing to accept Tang Wulin's challenge. If he had done so, he would be the one encompassed within that Blue Emperor Myriad Lightning Hell right now. After his martial soul had evolved into the space-time dragon, he had developed an extremely acute sense of time and space. As such, he could sense that all time and space would be destroyed by the laws of lightning within the scope of that soul skill. On top of that, the attack was imbued with a powerful righteous aura, which would undoubtedly make it extremely effective against evil soul masters. Yue Seng looked on with a determined expression while repeatedly reaffirming his conviction to never spar with Tang Wulin ever again. As for Xu Xiaoan, she was completely astonished. The current Tang Wulin resembled the lightning god with purplish golden light radiating from his entire body. Releasing such immense explosive power that simply approaching him would be an extremely perilous task. This is insane. The destructive power of that soul skill can compare with the 9th grade soul missile. Captain still hasn't decided on a Douluo title yet, right? How about we call him Bomb Douluo? Bomb Douluo Tang Wulin, haha. Shishi chuckled in a low voice. Yue Seng pursed his lips and was just about to say something when his pupils suddenly contracted. A pair of wings shot out of his back like lightning, and he instantly encircled an arm around Xu Xiaoan's waist before hurtling back in retreat. Shishi immediately realized that something was wrong upon seeing this, and the air warped around him as he tried to phase into space, but a streak of purplish golden light emerged out of thin air before striking the patch of space he had just vanished into. Arg! Shishi howled as purple lightning surged all over his body, and he was forcibly shocked out of thin air. His entire body trembled violently, and his hair stood up on end while his eyes rolled back amid his violent convulsions. His martial soul had been completely dispelled by that lightning strike, leaving him unable to even control himself, let alone escape. What's this about a bomb, Douluo? Tang Wulin appeared beside Shishi with a smile before draping an arm across Shishi's shoulders to prevent him from plummeting out of the sky. Shishi's entire body was numb, and his mind was completely blank, so he was in no shape to answer Tang Wulin's questions. Not only was he in great physical pain, even his soul had been shocked violently. A burst of suction force was released by Tang Wulin's hand to draw the lightning power within Shishi's body away, and he murmured to himself, "This lightning god whip truly is a formidable attack. Even with only 10% of its power, it was too fast for Shishi to evade, and he didn't even get a chance to release his battle armor." The lightning god whip was the second soul skill bestowed upon him by the infernal lightning vine. It was an individual offensive ability, so it complemented the Blue Emperor Myriad Lightning Hell perfectly. However, Tang Wulin still hadn't completely mastered the ability yet, so he didn't dare to unleash its full power. Both of these soul skills were extremely taxing on his soul power, with both the Blue Emperor Myriad Lightning Hell and the lightning god whip expending around 30% of his soul power after a single use. Tang Wulin could sense that there was a type of power of laws that was related to space imbued within this lightning god whip. This was perhaps due to the deeper understanding of spatial laws he had attained when completing the final fusion after witnessing the unpredictable storm demonstrated by Tang San. If he wanted to truly master this lightning god whip, he had to continue to attain a better understanding of space. Only after several minutes had passed did Shishi gradually recover from his numbness, but his body was still spasming from time to time. Boss, that thing is way too powerful. Even now, I can still only barely feel my own body. Why was I unable to evade that attack even after escaping into space? Shishi asked with a stunned expression. While being struck by the lightning god whip, he had felt as if his soul had almost been torn apart, and his space-time dragon martial soul was completely powerless. Of course, this was partially due to the fact that he had been struck while completely unprepared, but he had a feeling that even if he had been given ample time to prepare, he still wouldn't have been able to evade the attack. Chapter 1416. Tang Wulin explained, "The lightning god whip doesn't only draw upon my soul power, it draws upon my spiritual power as well. It's a type of power that lies on the border of space and time, and it seems to have arisen after the infernal lightning vine reached the 100,000-year level. Even I haven't completely figured it out yet, so I'll need more time to experience it, but I can sense it's imbued with a special type of power of laws, almost as if the lightning god whip contains its own unique domain." Shishi's lips twitched upon hearing this. "I'm never watching you cultivate again. It's way too dangerous. I have to work hard to make a breakthrough as well." For some reason, after being struck by that lightning god whip, he had attained a greater understanding of the laws of his space-time dragon, and he seemed to be closer to reaching rank 80 now. The 6 plant system great beasts within Tang Wulin's body were the beautiful silk tulip, the delicate inferno apricot flower, the octagonal mysterious ice grass, the black jade divine bamboo, the king gaze dew, and the land dragon golden melon. Recently, Yuan and Yui, England, and Yue's Hengyu had completed their soul Douluo breakthroughs and fused with an immortal plant each to attain a 100,000-year-old soul spirit. Yuan and Yue had chosen the land dragon golden melon, attaining 2 soul skills, as well as greater strength and defensive prowess. England had chosen the black jade divine bamboo, and Yue's Hengyu chose the delicate inferno apricot flower. As for Shu Lizzie, he had already consumed an immortal plant, and he was a food system soul master, so he wasn't going to take any of the other immortal plants. Thus, the only immortal plants that remained were the king gaze dew and octagonal mysterious ice grass, the former of which had been assigned to Shi, while the latter was assigned to Shu Shaoan. Shu Shaoan's martial soul was the star wheel ice staff. She had always been using the power of stars, but the power of ice within her martial soul was not to be neglected, either. As such, she was very eager to fuse with the octagonal mysterious ice grass to see if her martial soul would undergo a mutation. For Shi, not only could the king gaze dew directly raise his purple demon eyes to the highest level, it would also improve his learning ability. His space-time dragon martial soul was the most difficult to cultivate, and that was why he still hadn't reached the soul Douluo level. The higher his cultivation rank, the more understanding and enlightenment he required to make further progress. Tang Wulin said, "We have some time on our hands, so why don't you attack me so I can gauge your current level of power? Perhaps that'll help you." Shi's eyes immediately lit up. "So you're only going to defend without retaliation?" Tang Wulin rolled his eyes in response. "You're such a coward. Fine. Are you in? I'm in." Shi replied without any hesitation. He was unwilling to spar with Tang Wulin as he was afraid of being abused, but if Tang Wulin was only going to defend, then everything was different. "Count me in as well." Yue's Hengyu also flew over to them with excitement in his eyes. "Sure," Tang Wulin replied. Even though Shi and Yue's Hengyu were constantly bickering with one another, they had fought alongside each other on more occasions than they had battled even with Tang Wulin, so they were a very effective pair. Dazzling golden light erupted from Yue's Hengyu's body, and the light shot forth directly toward Tang Wulin like a golden cannonball. A layer of golden scales immediately surfaced over Tang Wulin's skin as he unleashed his golden dragon body, and he raised his hands to oppose the ball of golden light. Boom! The dazzling golden light exploded, but instead of fading away, it converged toward Tang Wulin from all sides like a massive mouth. The scorching heat being released was filled with the power of light and fire, and this was a clear result of an evolution in Yue's Hengyu's martial soul after he had become a soul Douluo fused with the delicate inferno apricot flower. Tang Wulin immediately unleashed his golden dragon tyrant body in response. Yet right at this moment, a faint streak of light appeared out of thin air before slashing toward the back of his neck without any warning. A sense of peril instantly spread through his entire body, and he instinctively dove forward as countless blue silver emperor vines erupted out of his back, making him resemble a porcupine. Ding! The light behind him suddenly warped, and the streaks of light abruptly accelerated by twofold, allowing it to reach Tang Wulin's neck before the blue silver emperor vines had completely erupted out of his body. However, just as the blade was about to come into contact with Tang Wulin, it suddenly returned to where it had been a second ago, and even the golden flames that had swept over his body retreated slightly. This was his time reversal domain. Almost at the exact same moment, over 100 streaks of light appeared in all directions at once, then instantly slashed toward him from all sides. What was even more startling was that the speeds of these streaks of light were constantly changing, making them completely unpredictable. Tang Wulin's expression changed slightly as he instantly increased the power output of his time reversal domain, causing all of the oncoming attacks to decelerate slightly. At the same time, I threw a punch into the air up ahead, and a small black hole was punched into space amid a resounding boom. A burst of powerful suction force erupted out of the black hole, and as a result, the oncoming blades were slowed down even further. Tang Wulin then spread his golden dragon king wings and revolved on the spot like a tornado. At the same time, he rose up into the air to clash with the descending Yue's Hengyu. Another resounding boom rang out, and Tang Wulin's entire body trembled as he was forced to descend from above. The fact that he was only able to defend limited his powers to only around the soul Douluo level, and he had been forced onto the back foot. A streak of reddish golden light then reached him immediately thereafter before slamming viciously into his body, turning all of his scales a reddish golden color and causing him to plummet directly toward the sea. Despite this, he was only getting more fired up. Streaks of light began to appear once again, and they began to rain down from above like a torrential storm. Some of the streaks of light were normal, while others were imbued with a peerlessly sharp aura. But what was really strange was that this sharpness seemed to both exist and not exist at the same time. He felt like if he were to ignore it, then the sharpness would become reality, but if he were to defend himself against it, it would instantly turn into an illusion. This was a very peculiar attack, and one that was extremely difficult to deal with. Tang Wulin praised Shi internally as he withdrew all of the blue silver emperor vines that he had released earlier, and they all began to revolve around him as his seventh soul ring lit up. This was his blue silver emperor true body. A layer of blue light appeared over his entire body, and it was as if he had become completely translucent. Meanwhile, every single blue silver emperor vine around him dispersed in all directions, as if they had a mind of their own, regardless of whether the streaks of light were moving quickly or slowly or whether they were illusionary or substantial. All of them were met by a blue silver emperor vine. Yue's Hengyu descended once again, and reddish golden flames burned all over his body as he spread his forewings to absorb the light elements in the air. However, before him stood a massive shield of interwoven blue silver emperor vines. Meanwhile, Shi was phasing in and out of space, unleashing a series of peerlessly sharp attacks, acting as the perfect foil to Yue's Hengyu's direct and aggressive assault. However, Tang Wulin was always able to use his blue silver emperor true body to withstand their attacks at just the right moment. Chapter 1417. This was a reflection of the power gap between them. Tang Wulin's spiritual power had already reached the spirit domain realm, thereby allowing him to instantly gauge the trajectories of Shi and Yue's Hengyu's attacks. In his blue silver emperor true body form, his blue silver emperor vines had become extremely resolute, and they were imbued with the power of the golden dragon king, as well as the numbing effect of the infernal lightning vine. As such, they were always able to effectively nullify Shi and Yue's Hengyu's attacks and keep them at bay. The three combatants seemed to be everywhere at once as they flashed through the air, and their battle was an extremely spectacular sight to behold. Shi had never had an opportunity to display his abilities to such a complete extent before. He was constantly traversing through time and space, and every time he did so, his light dragon dagger and shadow dragon dagger would become more ethereal and threatening. Every single blue silver emperor vine was like an enemy, and every clash taught him something new. He was learning how to avoid being bound by the vines, how to resist their numbing effect, and how to search for opportunities to break through the defensive line. He had broken through on more than one occasion through the power of his space-time dragon to create attacking opportunities for himself, but Tang Wulin's time reversal domain would effectively counter him every single time, sending him back to square one. This was not a good feeling, but it was also exactly because of this that he had to think even harder to find opportunities. Tang Wulin had made drastic improvements through constant battle during the trial of 5 gods, which was the best way to improve oneself, and Shi was currently experiencing the same thing, as was Yue's Hengyu. After fusing with the delicate inferno apricot flower, his powers had also been drastically enhanced, and the combination between his flames of light and the flames of the delicate inferno apricot flower soul spirit had allowed him to forge a unique path for himself. Compared to his original holy angel martial soul, his powers were now more aggressive and invasive. The invasive nature of his power resembled that of flames, and in conjunction with the unpredictable powers of Shi, the duo was posing a huge threat to Tang Wulin. Under these circumstances, where none of them were using their battle armor and Tang Wulin was unable to retaliate, he could only use his time reversal domain over and over again to bail himself out. Without having to worry about retaliation from Tang Wulin, Shi and Yue's Hengyu were able to attack to their heart's content, and they were quickly consolidating their newfound powers through this process. This was a very wonderful feeling for them, and at the same time, Tang Wulin was also benefiting from this sparring match. As someone whose forte lay in his offensive power, he had grown to rely heavily on the power of the Golden Dragon King during battle. This was evidenced by the fact that he had never even used the 8th soul skill of his Blue Silver Emperor during the trial of 5 gods. He had grown accustomed to attack, and had neglected many of the advantages that his Blue Silver Emperor possessed. Now that he was focusing entirely on defense, he was using his Blue Silver Emperor vines to defend himself, thereby allowing him to hone his skills when using his martial soul. At the same time, the constant repetitive usage of his time reversal domain was also allowing him to become more proficient in unleashing the domain. All three of them were above rank 70 in soul power, so they had all attained soul cores, which granted them a virtually limitless supply of soul power. After battling for over an hour straight, Yue's Hengyu was the first to concede. At this point, his clothes were completely drenched in sweat, and he flapped his wings to fly back out of the battle as he panted. "I'm done. That was awesome." He was completely exhausted, but his eyes were brighter than ever. The light beside him warped, and Shishi emerged with his hands on his hips. He was also panting heavily. That was the best. Boss, if you're willing to hold back like this, we'd be happy to spar with you every day. The blue-silver emperor vines were withdrawn, and Tang Wulin reverted back to his human form. His breathing was still normal, and he didn't appear to have undergone any rigorous exercise, but his eyes were slightly dim, which was an indication of a vast amount of spiritual power expenditure. You sure make it sound easy. This is very tiring for me as well. The direct clashes with Yue's Hengyu actually didn't pose much of a threat to him, as his physical constitution had already reached an unfathomably powerful state. To put it in simpler terms, even a quasi-god like Infernal King Douluo Harris's physical constitution may not even be able to match that of Tang Wulin. However, Shishi was an entirely different story. Shishi's attacks were virtually omnipresent, and they were completely unpredictable. Without being able to retaliate, he was forced to use his time reversal domain over and over again to ward off Shishi's attacks. Even though Shishi hadn't become a sole Douluo yet, he had posed a lot of problems for Tang Wulin, and this was a very encouraging sign. The more powerful his friends became, the better equipped they were going to be to lead the Tang Sect and Shrek Academy to greater heights. No matter how powerful he was only a single person. The current situation on the Douluo continent was very detrimental to both the Tang Sect and Shrek Academy, and he couldn't reverse everything alone. However, once all of Shrek's 7 monsters became titled Douluos, Tang Wulin was confident that they would be able to rebuild Shrek Academy for sure. Shishi chuckled. Don't be like that, boss. These sparring matches are mutually beneficial for all of us. If you're allowed to attack, then it'll be a non-contest that doesn't benefit anyone. I think all of our future sparring matches should be like this. Yue's Hengyu immediately nodded in a rare gesture of support for Shishi. I also think this is a great idea. There were a few areas of my fusion with the delicate Inferno apricot flower that were imperfect, but they seem to have all been ironed out during the course of that sparring match. If we do this a few more times, I'm sure I'll be able to fuse to an even greater extent with my soul spirit. Tang Wulin nodded with a contemplative look on his face. I'm not opposed to continuing in this fashion, but more changes need to be introduced to benefit our overall development. Once Yuan and the others complete everyone's suits of battle armor, they should join in on these sparring matches as well. How about this? We'll have 3 sparring matches where I don't retaliate for every 1 match where I'm allowed to attack as well. It's good to be able to hone your offensive abilities, but you need to learn to defend under pressure as well. Shishi and Yue's Hengyu exchanged a glance upon hearing this. Boss, you're not doing this to get back at us, are you? Tang Wulin maintained a serious expression as he asked. Am I that type of person? I'm proposing this for the sake of everyone's improvement. Ahem. Shishi scratched his head and said, sometimes, I feel like you can be pretty sly. Tang Wulin suddenly smiled, but the smile sent shivers running down Shishi's spine for some reason. Before Tang Wulin even spoke again, Shishi was already backtracking. Alright, I think this is a good idea. We do indeed need some pressure as well. During the upcoming period of time, the submarine would rise to the surface almost every day for them to spar. The sea was the ideal drill ground for them where they could battle without any inhibitions, and soon, the other members of Shrek's 7 monsters began to join in as well. At times, Tang Wulin was battling them without retaliating, and at other times, he was allowed to attack, but everyone was fighting him all at once. Everyone's combat prowess was constantly improving, and Tang Wulin was also consolidating his own powers through the repetitive cycle of sparring and cultivation. Time flew by, and they drew closer and closer to the Douluo continent. On this day, Tang Wulin and his friends had only just returned from their sparring match when he was approached by the submarine captain. Sect Master, we've managed to contact the Sect. The fact that they had gotten into contact with the Tang Sect indicated that they were already very close to the Douluo continent. Tang Wulin smiled and asked, how long until we reach the shore? The captain replied, we'll get there in around 3 days. The Vice Palace Master has requested that you contact him as soon as possible. He seems to have some urgent matters to discuss with you. Tang Wulin's heart jolted upon hearing this. Urgent matters? Could it be that the Douluo Empire had still failed to withstand the assault from the Federal Fleet? He quickly hurried to the communication cabin in the submarine, and the captain asked all of the workers to vacate the room, then also left after using the communication device to get into contact with the Tang Sect. Zhang Xin's voice rang out from the other end of the line. Wulin. Tang Wulin could hear the exhaustion of Zhang Xin's voice as he spoke. What happened? Tang Wulin hurriedly asked, but he wasn't all that anxious or urgent. After experiencing so much, he had learned how to be calm under all circumstances. Chapter 1418. Zhang Xin chuckled. There's no need to worry. You've done very well. The Federal Fleet has already been forced back by the Douluo Empire, and it's preparing to retreat. The two sides were initially caught in a stalemate as the Federal Fleet was wary of the weapons we had supplied to the Douluo Empire, but the Dou Spirit Empire's fleet suddenly turned up and also launched a 10th grade 2-fold soul harvesting missile. The missile inflicted some damage upon the Federal Fleet, and it's retreated quite a long way back. According to the information provided to us by our contacts over at the Douluo Empire, this war most likely isn't going to happen. After all, Shenzhen can't afford to instigate this war knowing that the entire Federal Fleet could be wiped out. All of the advantages lie with the Douluo Empire, and they're able to formulate their defensive efforts on land. Even if sufficient damage could be inflicted upon the Douluo Empire, the Federation definitely wouldn't want to risk the destruction of the 3 fleets. Thus, their momentum has been completely halted, and the situation is only worsening the longer this stalemate continues. So I'm guessing that the Federal Fleet will be forced to return. If the Federation still wants to instigate this war, they'll have to launch an attack of an even larger scale against the Douluo Empire. Who knows how long that would take to prepare? Tang Wulin heaved a huge sigh of relief upon hearing this. That's fantastic news. I'm sure we've prevented the deaths of many innocent civilians. Why do you sound so exhausted, Your Majesty? Is there something else you have to tell me? Zhang Xin sighed and replied, the Federation has already declared our Tang Sect to be a treasonous organization. Tang Wulin's expression immediately stiffened upon hearing this. The Federation had declared the Tang Sect to be a treasonous organization. During the Tang Sect's 20,000-year history, it had always been one of the most powerful sects on the Douluo continent. Countless years ago, the founder of the Tang Sect, Tang San, had thwarted the evil scheme of the Spirit Hall. Countless years ago, Hua Yuao had founded the Spirit Pagoda and protected the entire Douluo Empire on his own. However, the Tang Sect was now being proclaimed as a treasonous organization. This meant that the entire Federation was going to reject the Tang Sect and treat them like a Holy Spirit cult. This meant that the Tang Sect would only be able to exist in the shadows from now on. How dare they? Tang Wulin's voice instantly became as cold as ice. It had been a very long time since he had been this enraged by anything. The amorous Douluo chuckled coldly. Some people simply won't rest until we're all dead. This topic sparked a huge debate in the federal parliament, and the Dove faction did everything in its power to oppose the announcement. But the evil faction and neutral powers joined forces against them. They used your participation in the trial of 5 gods and the new weapons that the 2 empires had attained as evidence that the Tang Sect had committed treason, but they have no proof. Tang Wulin said in a cold voice. Zhang Xin replied in an indifferent manner. Do you think they need proof? Prior to this, we already anticipated that something like this would happen. Don't worry, even if we're being denounced as a treasonous organization, the Tang Sect won't fall that easily. We'll face this issue together once you come back. Tang Wulin asked. What about the Blood God Legion? The Palace Master and many of our Tang Sect's elites are still at the Blood God Legion. What about them? Zhang Xin replied. The Federation clearly thinks that the Blood God Legion no longer needs us. Prior to making this public declaration, the federal parliament had already sent out powerful beings from the Battle God Hall and Spirit Pagoda to the Blood God Legion to apprehend the Palace Master and the members of our Tang Sect. Thankfully, the Mirror Douluo was tipped off in advance, and the Palace Master and the others have already returned. They've been replaced by powerful beings from the Spirit Pagoda, and Lang Yaoshu is now the stand-in Blood One. Tang Wulin clenched his fists with fury. So everything our Tang Sect has done for the continent for the past thousands of years is just being disregarded? That's right. Zhang Xin's voice was very calm, but Tang Wulin could sense the unrest deep in his heart. After a brief silence, Tang Wulin said, I'll be back in 3 days. Zhang Xin replied, all right, we'll discuss this matter further once you return. After ending the call, Tang Wulin's good mood had been completely ruined. The Tang Sect had existed for 20,000 years and had done nothing but work for the peace and development of the Douluo Star. How disheartening was it that the Tang Sect was now being declared as a treasonous organization? Setting aside everything else, the Blood God Legion had defended the abyssal passageway for 6,000 years, and countless Tang Sect disciples had perished for that cause. As Blood One, the heartless Douluo had dedicated over 60 years of his life to the Blood God Legion, yet this was how the Federation was repaying the Tang Sect. It could indeed be argued that his trip to the Douluo Empire was against the interests of the Federation, but he had made this trip for the sake of all of humanity. If a war were to ensue, not only would countless lives be lost, the greatest beneficiary would be the Holy Spirit cult. cult. It had already been proven that the Spirit Pagoda was colluding with the Holy Spirit cult, yet the Federation had gone after the Tang Sect while leaving the Spirit Pagoda to its own devices. The tag of treasonous organization was like a slap to the face to the 20,000 years of glory of the Tang Sect. This was undoubtedly going to be an extremely heavy blow to all of the Tang Sect's disciples, yet the Federation had made such a decision without taking any of that into account. Tang Wulin's fists were tightly clenched, and the rage in his heart refused to subside. Compared to the entire Federation, both Shrek Academy and the Tang Sect were very feeble. There was no way that an academy and a sect would be able to contend with the entire Federation, and Tang Wulin certainly wasn't going to take vengeance on the Federation. But what was going to become of the Tang Sect now? Was the Federation really going to push the entire Tang Sect to the Douluo Empire? In reality, the Douluo Empire's fixation on the Tang Sect was precisely because of the sect's advanced soul technology. Even if the Tang Sect were to defect to the Douluo Empire, the Empire would just become a second Douluo Federation in a few millennia, and the Tang Sect would be tossed by the wayside again. The most painful thing for Tang Wulin was that he didn't know how to face this situation. He couldn't see any future for the Tang Sect. On top of that, there was no way that the Federation would allow the entire Tang Sect to move to the Douluo Empire. The Tang Sect had been declared as a treasonous organization, so it was undoubtedly going to be heavily targeted. The Holy Spirit cult was a terror organization while the Tang Sect was a treasonous organization. The two were virtually equals. What a foolish decision the Federation had made. For the first time, Tang Wulin was struck by a strong sense of discontent toward the Federation. He refrained from revealing this news to everyone else and decided to wait until they all returned to the Federation. Never did he think that the Tang Sect would be plunged into such a perilous situation. The task of reviving Shrek Academy was already an extremely monumental one. Now that the Tang Sect had been declared as a treasonous organization, he was going to face even more pressure as the Tang Sect Master and Sea God's Pavilion Master. 3 days later, the submarine silently drew to a halt in the underground lake beneath the Tang Sect, which it had traveled into along the marine tunnel. After being at sea for so long, stepping back onto land struck everyone with a sense of relief and stability. But this didn't apply to Tang Wulin. Chapter 1419. The underground Tang Sect base in Skycy City was still the same as it had been in the past, but Tang Wulin could see a series of complex emotions in the eyes of the Tang Sect's disciples, including indignation and pain, but more so fury and humiliation. Their expressions only eased slightly upon seeing Tang Wulin, and they all extended respectful bows toward him. The trial of 5 gods had made Tang Wulin a target of the Federation, but it had also allowed him to truly establish himself in the Tang Sect. Defeating an entire empire through one's individual power was an extremely glorious and monumental feat, and all of the Tang Sect disciples were in full celebration when they saw the footage of the trial. Only then were they made aware of just how powerful their new sect master was. Having such a young leader with such brilliant potential brought immense hope to the Tang Sect. Ever since that period of time around 10,000 years ago when the Tang Sect had almost fallen into complete obscurity, the sect had taken more care in ensuring its heritage wasn't severed. While still in their primes, all of the past sect masters would choose groups of bright young talents for special nurturing and choose successors from among them. However, the Shrek City bombing had resulted in the deaths of many of the Tang Sect's brightest young talents, which was a contributing factor behind Tang Wulin's accelerated ascension. Tang Wulin had proven through his actions to the 2 limit Douluos of the Tang Sect that he was worthy of their trust. During this journey, which had spanned less than a year, he had undergone a complete transformation and returned as a truly powerful being. At the same time, he had also brought back the newly ascended limit Douluo, Holy Spirit Douluo Yali. Even though the Tang Sect and Shrek Academy were being oppressed by all sides, they had a total of 4 limit Douluos among their ranks in the form of Light Dark Douluo Lun Yeyu, Heartless Douluo Cao Daja, Amorous Douluo Zhangxin, and Holy Spirit Douluo Yali, so they still stood at the very pinnacle of the continent when it came to top-tier power. Welcome back. A familiar voice rang out, and a figure silently appeared before Tang Wulin and Yali. Your Majesty. The figure who had appeared was none other than Zhang Xin, and Tang Wulin's expression finally eased slightly at the sight of him. Zhang Xin wore a faint smile, displaying no visible sign of the immense pressure he had been facing recently. I'm glad you're back, Zhang Xin said before turning to the Holy Spirit Douluo. Congratulations, Yali. He was surprised to discover that not only had Yali become a limit Douluo, her essence, energy, and spirit seemed to have undergone a complete transformation. The loneliness and despair in her eyes had disappeared, and she seemed to be full of vitality. Thank you, Your Majesty. How is the Tang Sect? Yali asked. Zhang Xin smiled, and replied, the sky hasn't fallen on us yet. We've actually already anticipated that this day would come. They've already unleashed Godslayer missiles on Shrek Academy and our Tang Sect. Nothing is beneath them. They've become blinded by their power, and they're trying to drive us into a corner before completely eradicating us. Yali nodded in response. They're being far too reckless, and they've severely underestimated us. Let's talk further when we get back. Lodging was organized for the Tang Sect disciples and Blood Dragon squad that had accompanied Tang Wulin on his trip, while Tang Wulin, Zhang Xin, Yali, and the rest of Shrek's 7 monsters gathered in the conference chamber of the Tang Sect headquarters. Zhang Xin turned to Tang Wulin and said, you've completed your mission to perfection, Sect Master. We've achieved our objective. The Federal fleet is still locked in a stalemate with the Douluo Empire, but it's inevitable that they'll have to turn back, so we no longer need to worry about a war for now. Tang Wulin nodded in response. The Douluo Empire and Dou Spirit Empire have both expressed their gratitude to our sect, and the Douluo Empire has extended an offer for our Tang Sect to entirely transfer over to their continent if we wish to do so. A hint of admiration for Zhang Xin flashed through Tang Wulin's eyes as he spoke. It was clear that aside from trying to prevent this war, the Tang Sect had also chosen to help the 2 empires to ensure there was always a safety net for the sect. Zhang Xin said, I know what you're thinking, but the Tang Sect won't leave the Douluo continent, just as Shrek Academy won't, either. Our roots lie here, and our forefathers had to expend countless efforts for the Tang Sect to achieve its current scale and glory. As their successors, we can't abandon everything they built up. Yali nodded, and said, what's the current situation like? Has the Federation done anything? Zhang Xin smiled, and replied, they haven't dared to do anything too out of line as they're well aware of the power that our Tang Sect holds, and they know that they can't afford to push us too hard. Indeed, the weapons provided to the 2 empires by the Tang Sect was sufficient testament of its power. If the Tang Sect were to seek vengeance against the Federation without any regard for the consequences, the Federation would be in serious trouble. Zhang Xin continued, at the moment, they're only making further efforts to oppress us and cut off as many avenues as possible through which we obtain resources. At the same time, they've been searching for our bases and have already found 3, but we were prepared in advance, so we didn't suffer any substantial losses. Yali said, that's good to hear. What are your plans from here onward, Your Majesty? Zhang Xin turned to Tang Wulin and said, that'll be for the Sect Master to decide. Me? Tang Wulin faltered slightly upon hearing this. Zhang Xin gave a firm nod in response. Of course. You are the one calling the shots in our Tang Sect. You'll be the one to decide the future direction our sect goes in, and we'll be here to support you. We've all witnessed your development during the past years, and to be honest, you've stunned all of us. Your rapid rate of progression is extremely rare even among all of your predecessors, and it shows us that we've made the right decision. On top of that, you've already built up a sufficient level of influence in the sect, so it's time that you lead our Tang Sect and Shrek Academy to glory. You can't afford to back down and must continue onward now. Your latent potential is already being tapped into, and now, it's time to tap into your leadership potential as well. Cao Daja told me that you're different. He told me that the greater the pressure you're under, the more power you release. We all hope to see this trend continue. A wry smile appeared on Tang Wulin's face. Your Majesty, I'm still not familiar enough with our Tang Sect as a whole. Do not fear, Zhang Xin cut him off, and said, think carefully about this, and when you make your decision, we'll help you analyze whether it's viable or not. Tang Wulin didn't continue after hearing this. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes as his brain began to rapidly process the situation. Even the Tang Sect was under severe threat, so there was no way that Shrek Academy could be rebuilt under these circumstances. The Tang Sect and Shrek Academy were going to face the power of the entire Federation, as well as that of the Holy Spirit cult and the Spirit Pagoda from the shadows. These were all formidable powerhouses. Even the Holy Spirit cult alone may be too powerful for them to oppose at the moment, let alone the might of the entire Federation. Zhang Xin merely waited in silence, and everyone's attention also fell upon Tang Wulin. Yali was appraising him with a gentle and encouraging look in her eyes. She had witnessed Tang Wulin's growth during this past year in person, and she had also been astonished by what he had achieved. He had developed so quickly that it struck her with a surreal feeling. It was most likely likely the case that Zhang Xin still hadn't realized that Tang Wulin was already a titled Douluo, and nor could he be aware of the miracle that Tang Wulin had created while out at sea. Without the vital effort he had put in to stall the federal fleet, the Tang Sect's weapons alone wouldn't have been enough to prevent this war. Tang Wulin currently possessed spirit domain realm spiritual power, so even a limit Douluo wouldn't be able to glean his cultivation rank. After a long while, Tang Wulin reopened his eyes, and a sense of calmness had replaced the urgency on his face. Your Majesty, I think we should split this situation up into several facets and address them in order of priority. Our first priority now is to get rid of this treason tag that's been assigned to our sect. With such a heavy burden weighing us down, we won't be able to do anything. How do you plan to do that? Zhang Xin asked. Chapter 1420. Tang Wulin shook his head in response. I'm not sure how, but we have to find an opportunity. Free speech is a right in the Federation. Even though the Parliament makes all decisions, controversy often plays an important role. We have to wait for an opportunity to prove that the Tang Sect is not a treasonous organization. And prior to that, we have to do our best to develop the sect to minimize the losses we'll suffer from being declared as a treasonous organization. Tang Wulin's proposed plan was very ordinary, and there wasn't anything special about it. Zhang Xin nodded in response, but there was a hint of disappointment in his eyes. Aside from that, there's something else I'm going to do. Tang Wulin raised his voice slightly, and a hint of determination and confidence reappeared in his eyes. Oh. Zhang Xin raised an eyebrow and asked, what is it? Tang Wulin replied without any hesitation, I'm going to rebuild Shrek Academy. Everyone's eyes widened upon hearing this, and the Holy Spirit Douluo couldn't help but ask, how can we rebuild the academy in this current situation? Tang Wulin replied, the Federation has declared the Tang Sect to be a treasonous organization, but they can't declare the same for our Shrek Academy. On top of that, our academy is a victim of a terrorist attack, so there's no sound reason for them to oppose the academy's rebuild. If someone were to declare the rebuild of Shrek Academy at a time like this, what would be the reaction from all sides? Shishi chuckled, we'll probably become public enemy number one. Tang Wulin smiled and said, that's exactly our objective. Only by doing this can we thrust ourselves under the limelight. The higher ups of the federal parliament know that the Tang Sect and Shrek Academy are virtually a single entity, but they still can't declare Shrek Academy to be a treasonous organization. On top of that, our Shrek Academy has connections all over the continent, so we'll definitely receive a certain level of support once the rebuild is announced. We're no longer the Shrek 7 monsters that we once were. We have what it takes to rebuild Shrek Academy now. Not only are we going to announce a rebuild, we're going to lodge an application to the Federation to request their support. Zhang Xin's expression gradually changed slightly as he appraised Tang Wulin. He had also prepared some bold plans of his own, but none were as bold as this one. However, upon further thought, it was indeed a good opportunity to rebuild Shrek Academy at a time like this. Tang Wulin and his friends had all developed, and the Spirit Pagoda had been struck by a lot of controversy and skepticism over their collusion with the Holy Spirit cult. The Tang Sect had been declared as a treasonous organization, and the federal fleet had failed to instigate the war that the Federation had promised. With the combination of all of these events, the Federation was actually currently in a very sticky situation. If they were to announce the rebuild of Shrek Academy now, neither the Federation nor the Spirit Pagoda would dare to directly attack the academy. Another important factor was the Holy Spirit cult, which was hiding in the shadows. The Holy Spirit cult was undoubtedly very eager to see this war eventuate, as evidenced by the fact that they had even sent a powerful being of infernal King Douluo Harris's caliber to the Douluo Empire. This meant that a very large portion of the Holy Spirit cult's forces had to have been transferred to the Douluo Empire to benefit from the widespread death that would occur during the war. Even though the war hadn't actually commenced, their people definitely still had to remain there, and it would take quite some time for them to return to the Federation from the Empire. Even if a significant portion of the Holy Spirit cult's forces still remained in the Federation, Shrek Academy and the Tang Sect had fallen at Douluo to oppose them. As such, it would also be very difficult for the Holy Spirit cult to destroy the new Shrek Academy. Even if the Spirit Pagoda wanted to assist the Holy Spirit cult, they wouldn't dare to do so under this current storm of controversy. Otherwise, if it were to be discovered that the Spirit Pagoda had assisted the Holy Spirit cult in attacking Shrek Academy, then their collusion with the Holy Spirit cult would be set in stone. No matter how ambitious Kyangi Dongfang was, there was no way he would make such a foolish decision, and if Shrek Academy were to establish a stable foothold for itself, then all of the Shrek Academy alumni all over the continent would flock to support it. At that point, Shrek Academy would be grabbing everyone's attention, thereby significantly alleviating the pressure on the Tang Sect. As such, this seemingly risky plan actually seems to be very viable. Yali said, Wulin, rebuilding Shrek Academy is an extremely important task that we have to take seriously. Once the rebuild begins, everything would be exposed to public scrutiny, and the academy will be under a lot of pressure from all sides. On top of that, you've already been exposed as the Tang Sect's master, so it's very likely that the Federation is going to target you. A confident smile appeared on Tang Wulin's smile. I know the importance of this task, but I have a plan. The branding of the Tang Sect as a treasonous organization had taken place very abruptly, and the entire Douluo continent was in shock. After all, the Tang Sect had existed for an extremely long time. Oppressing it from the shadows was one thing, but declaring it to be a treasonous organization was something else entirely. The general public immediately raised vehement opposition and demanded that the Parliament release evidence for these claims, in response to which Tang Wulin's participation in the trial of 5 gods and the powerful soul missiles that the Douluo Empire had used to attack the federal fleet were all presented as proof. However, any intelligent individual could see that the Federation had no concrete evidence to prove that the soul missiles had been provided by the Tang Sect. They were only using different excuses to link the Tang Sect to this matter. The Federation had fabricated a lot of evidence, such as presenting soul missile fragments with the Tang Sect's insignia on them, but those were clearly forgeries. Even if the Tang Sect really was supporting the enemy, they wouldn't be foolish enough to leave such evidence behind. Despite all this, the federal parliament stuck to its original decision, but they didn't dare to take things too far. All they did was order the closure of all of the Tang Sect's branches and prohibit the sect from engaging in all business and societal activities. On top of that, all Tang Sect's disciples were ordered to leave the sect. It was clear that the Federation didn't dare to eradicate the Tang Sect in fear of retaliation, and what was even clearer was that the Spirit Pagoda's expression of support in this decision was a blatant act of revenge for the Tang Sect exposing their collusion with the Holy Spirit cult. Thus, the entire continent was plunged into turmoil, and all of the major powers were waiting to see what would happen next. The parliament's decision was receiving vehement objections from the Dou faction, and they hadn't taken any extreme measures against the Tang Sect. However, they had set up checkpoints at all of the continent's ports and docks to prevent the Tang Sect from defecting to the Douluo Empire. Many of the organizations that were friendly with the Tang Sect were lamenting the situation. After being declared as a treasonous organization, the Tang Sect wouldn't be able to appear before the public eye, and it was clearly beginning to fall from grace. This declaration would have definitely dealt the Tang Sect an extremely heavy blow, and many of the sect's disciples were undoubtedly going to leave. They were using the pressure of controversy to slowly whittle down the Tang Sect from the inside. In contrast, the Spirit Pagoda was constantly engaging in a series of philanthropic activities, including creating more job openings for the general public to work in the Spirit Pagoda, donating soul spirits to the military, and providing free spots to enter the Spirit Pagoda's Spirit Ascension plane. All of these measures had been taken to restore their public image. Thanks so much for watching this video. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Also leave a comment down below with suggestions on what novels to read.